You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
I have a question for you. Have you ever read a book called 1984?
By George Orwell.
Correct. There's
Why? What's happening?
Well, there's a character in there called Big Brother. And I think that I liken this age of flesh and blood to a bit of a 1984. We've got constant monitoring, constant control, and you know the big hand of Big Brother is coming down and changing our game. Whether it's for the good, whether it's for the best or it's for the worst, we'll talk about in this episode. But we're coming off some recent and massive news here, Hayden.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should get straight into it.
Let's do it. All right, so episode 69, we are talking about, of course, the recent Classic Constructed ban by Legendary Studios. They banned Stubby Hammerers, targeting this Phi combo deck, as it was called. Probably one of the most broken decks I've seen in a while, not gonna lie. I think that overall, it's a good change. Should there have been a change? That's what we'll get into. But yeah, it's going to be shaking up the meta here for the Classic Constructed meta here for PT Lille, which is coming in a few weeks. So just going to be diving deep into the ban itself and also how we think it's going to affect the future, how we're preparing, and how we expect the meta to sort of shift, change, and adapt to this this sort of wrench that's been thrown in our system. Anyway, Hayden.
Yeah.
First off, always, you're weak in flesh and blood, sir.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was just thinking as well, not just PT Lille, right? But you've got the Calling Lille and you've also got the Calling Singapore coming up. So, plus multiple battle hardens. So some really big events that are going to be impacted by this as we head towards, I guess, we'll talk about it, the scheduled ban and restricted announcement on August 30th at the conclusion of sort of this competitive season. This week in Flesh and Blood, I played a skirmish. So got out on Saturday. I like going to my local stores and playing events. I find it super enjoyable. I like to get out where I can. Usually at the moment it's for draft, to get some draft practice for Singapore and Lille. But as well, if I can make it, I will try and play some other events. So wanted to play at least one skirmish this season. Took an Ira deck to skirmish. I think the deck was pretty bad. I tried to take the tempo happen, Brendan. I was trying to make it happen. It didn't really happen. So I lost in the top four. Claimed my little foil and walked off and put the deck in the bin. No, I didn't, but I just definitely deconstructed it and put the cards away immediately. So, and other than that, this week just been trying to get on that sort of testing grind, get ready. Only 2 and a bit weeks till I leave for Singapore. As of this, actually, just 14 days till I leave. So, trying to work out what on earth I'm going to play, what I want to be packing in my bag, and that's kind of been the week. What about you?
Yeah, so no sanctioned events, but doing a lot of testing, of course. I mean, just a little speed bump here with the most prevalent deck in the meta just kind of getting banned. So it changes a lot. I think that it's a bit frustrating because a lot of the work that we put in was around that Phi deck. Obviously Phi still exists, but it's significantly different. So I know, Sasha and I were a little irritated with that, and, going a bit back to square one, heading back to Hayden's Viscerai deck is sort of one of the pillars of the format here that we'll be testing again with our Gauntlet deck. But yeah, I know Runeblade sort of faded in power there for a little bit, and, Flesh and Blood, they can't have that, so they got to bring that Runeblade back up. So we got Briar and Viscerai back in the fray, and of course Prism, Oldhim, the usual suspects. So interested to see sort of where we go with that. No official events outside of that. I have a backpacking trip here in Bend, Oregon, starting on Thursday. I'll go till about Monday. So I've been somewhat preparing for that, doing some, 35 to 40 pound backpack hikes out through near the lake here in the 105, 110 degree heat, which is good preparation. I'm very happy I did that little test run because I got a bunch of blisters in my new hiking boots, so now I know where to tape up. I'm not going to suffer this weekend.
Tape your whole foot.
Yeah.
I'll get you through.
Yeah, well. All right. Well, with that, we're on to the news.
Yeah, I mean, nothing too major this week. So, of course, the ban restricted announcement did happen last week. This was an unscheduled announcement. So, the next announcement is coming August 30th, which is the conclusion of Pro Tour and the calling in Lille. But before we get into the national season, so potential shakeups there with either Living Legend or a further ban restricted announcement potentially coming. No other changes though to ban restricted, so no changes to Blitz, no changes to Commoner in this current announcement. Over the weekend, we had Battle Hardened Auckland, and no stubbies in the finals, Brendan, even though it was legal. It was a all-Guardian showdown. I believe it was Bravo versus Ultim. There was actually some coverage of that, which is good to see. We didn't get it for the previous calling, but we got it for this Battle Hardened, although the format may be slightly less relevant now with Stubby Hammerers banned. But I know they had a big weekend over there in Auckland, and we have, I think, up in the Pacific Northwest, it might be Portland, happening either next weekend or the weekend after. So there is more Battle Hardens coming, and then of course Singapore happening in just over 2 weeks from us dropping the pod. Elsewhere, up on fabtcg.com in line with the skirmish season. So skirmish season is underway. We're through 1 week of skirmish season, and our good friend the Tall Timmy has been doing a gauntlet series up on fabtcg.com, and he asked me to come on. So there is a video this week up there of me and the Tall Timmy dueling it out in a Blitz game for the skirmish gauntlet series, which you can find. Brendan, anything from your side this week?
Well, the Fat Fitness Challenge did come to a conclusion, so we're going to have our inaugural recognition and prizes today. I'm just going to try to bang this out pretty quick, but overall, I just want to say a few words. I know we did on last week's pod, just an incredible event. Really happy with the participation. It was just super awesome in the Arsenal Pass Patreon Discord. You know, we had multiple calls with the people in there, and just the daily updates were incredible. And I know a lot of people sort of came together and motivated each other to really get some stuff done this past month, which was very, very nice to see. So first off, and Hayden, it's going to be, I kind of have two quote unquote winners, like big winners for this past month. I think the first one here is going to come as not a huge surprise, and that's going to be Tebow. T obviously getting in there from day one. This was his first time ever exercising, and he absolutely killed it. So T actually lost about, I think it was over 30 pounds, close to 40 pounds in that 1 month period. And, you know, he's got some pretty incredible goals on the horizon that he's looking to hit before his 24th birthday, and I believe 100% in my heart that he can do that. But yeah, this guy, he inspired me a lot this past month. He really did. And I think that I'm not the only one that shares that sentiment. And we're all very lucky to have had someone who put so much effort into it and was able to accomplish exactly what they set out to do. So T will be receiving a Arsenal Pass playmat, an Arsenal Pass life pad, as well as a full set of full art heralds, the Herald of Rebirth ones, the ones that were given out to content creators. And then my next big winner is Alex C from the Arsenal Pass Patreon Discord. Just extremely active in that Discord. We had a separate channel for nominations. Alex's name came up by far the most. I think a lot of people got a lot from his kind of daily commitment. So Alex will also be receiving the playmat as well as the full art heralds and the life pad. And then two more we got here. The Tekla Foundry, also just very good commitment. I know that he actually really crushed it this past month. And then lastly is Zachary, who's near you, Hayden. I believe he's over in Australia. So for them, they will be getting Arsenal.
He's in the same country.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty freaking close. That's closer than me. But they will both be receiving Arsenal Pass playmats as well as life pads. Tons of other people that, you know, there was a lot of people in the Discord. A lot of people did really well, and people that weren't even sort of up for these prizes that were either on Twitter or in their own respective communities. Just absolutely incredible month. And, you know, I hope we can find a way to do it again. Maybe we switched up a bit, find some other kind of lofty goal to go after. But that community drive and that community, just like with the collective goal, was one of the most enjoyable things I've done just ever.
Yeah, super awesome to see. And I mean, honestly, just congratulations to everyone. You know, I know for everyone it was different goals, right? Everyone had different goals, different things they wanted to achieve during this I guess month of health, mindfulness, wellness, and so many people smashed it at the park, which is awesome. And even just to participate, I think is like it's a big thing. So yeah. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, so we also have a deck tech, Alexi deck tech up on the Arsenal Pass channel. Hayden, I don't know if it's up now or if it's going to be up shortly after this pod, but that's
Definitely up. It's been out for a couple of days already. Yep.
So up now with Yuki. It's Alexi deck tech. There's an additional piece on the Arsenal Pass Patreon if you want to get the Cyborg guide and a bit of tips and tricks. All of that is there if you're looking to go a little bit deeper and just crush those local battle hards and callings. But yeah, Yuki, just an awesome player, very, very articulate, and was really special to sort of get into the mind of a master when it comes to Lexi. So very happy with that.
Lastly, Brendan, just want to give a massive shout out to all of the Arsenal Pass patrons. Thank you for all your continued support. Of course, if you do want to look at our Patreon, you can find us at patreon.com/Arsenal Pass. We do monthly extra bonus pods. Of course, whenever we throw a deck tech up, as Brendan just said, we'll put up a full sideboard guide up on the Patreon for those, and just other content that we throw up sort of sporadically, whether it be sort of, draft things or sheets or gameplay sort of analysis videos. We tend to do those pretty sporadically as well. So all available there, and all the past sort of videos that we've done and deck techs also all available there. But anyway, Brendan, where to next? What's that? Smell.
That smell. Pretty hot out here in Texas. I don't know what it's like over in Australia. I'm assuming it's a bit more chilly because I see your quarter zip, as they say. Doesn't mean we can't fire up that Barbie. We run that thing 12 months out of the year, 365. Let's go, Hayden. Take us in.
Yeah, got a Command Cookout question from the Patreon Discord this week from Adam P. And Brendan, I wanted to bring this question to the grill to just revisit something that we actually have touched on previously, but I think it was in a mailbag maybe a year ago or 9 months ago, and we briefly talked about it. But Adam asked a pretty pointed question about this. So they say, in previous card games I've played, example Android Netrunner, qualifying players would get buys round one. Would this work in Flesh and Blood? I know you've spoken in the past about hoping to just get through the early rounds, so you only have to tech and worry about the competitive decks. Would round one or even day one buys warp the meta? How would you hand them out for invitation or open events? PTI, XP, ELO? What about qualifying event winners? How could this work?
Yeah, so I don't know too much about the sort of cascading effect of implementing this, if it adds more rounds or whatever it is. But let's say that all else is equal if you do this. It would be both ELO and certain events, right? So a big one for me is they'll do a Friday event, which right now there's not a lot of incentivation to go to. And on top of that, it's just like the Friday event is so much harder than Saturday logistically for work and things like this. So I just wish that, if possible, there could be some way to reward the people who play in that event and potentially win it. While there is some rewards, usually some boxes or maybe like a promo or something. If that directly led into a buy in one of the early rounds, or at the very least, maybe just you're prioritized for the buy if it does happen in round one or something like that for the actual professional event that happens on Saturday, I think that'd be great. I think there'd be a lot of high caliber players, and it'd be a very competitive event on Friday. On top of that, based off ELO, if this was possible, and again, this is all else remaining equal and there not being some sort of negative cascading effect to you implementing early buys to higher ranked players, I do think that based off ELO, if you were to implement the system, that they should get early round buys. Like, that'd be a great incentivization program. Currently, ELO is net zero incentivization. Hopefully, in the future, it will lead you to invites and things like this. But on top of that, if you were able to get these quality of life sort of bonuses at tournaments, I think that would be great. But like I said, Hayden, I will defer to you in the sense of my ignorance toward this topic and some of the effect, whatever the additional things or additional negative possible effects from this could be, whether it's longer tournaments or just whatever BS it could be.
Sure. I mean, first of all, that is not that. It wouldn't impact the length of an event because you still have the same amount of players. You just have these first round buys, so it shouldn't impact it basically at all. 2 round, 3 round buys still. But the interesting thing, I think, is that I agree with you. Like, if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna implement buys, I think you need a a play-in system somewhere around an event. So either like the Friday before, or something that I like that Magic used to do. It helps local stores as well. Is you have these, although maybe we have too many local events that this could be an issue, I guess. But you used to have these like trial events basically, which is in the month lead up to the event, say anywhere from anywhere from 8 to 4 weeks before the event, they'd run these events in store. Usually one store gets one event, and you get 2 buys if you win the event. So you get round 1, round 2 buy if you win these events, and multiple stores could run these, and then there'd be ratings based things like this, and then you could also potentially have on like the Friday, these kind of last chance trials where you can pick up your buys, which does, like you say, I think add an interesting event to the Friday. So in terms of like Adam's question on execution, that's how I would look at execution. Then I think you've got to look at like what the impact of these things are. So one of the things you talked about is like having this a big event on a Friday is like you provide incentive for players to go and sort of grind this out and play it and be there on the Friday. I agree. I don't know if that's a good thing though. Like, I think whether or not you want just a fun event on Friday, which personally I think it's great that you have these kind of more fun events on a Friday, but I do agree it doesn't necessarily drive as much traffic and drive as much hype and excitement for the Friday event. That aside, I think that's probably personal preference. What it does mean is that people potentially need to take or feel like they have to take more leave, be into a city earlier, pay an extra night for a hotel, all these different things to make sure they can still try and be competitive, because really you're putting yourself at a disadvantage to not start the event with 2 buys, right? Or 1 buy or whatever it is. So you want to be as competitive as possible and give yourself every single edge. And that does mean both financial and time requirements to do that. So it's just another added thing in my eyes of things you have to do. So I'd be more in favor of, if you're going to wheel out that system for a Friday, that you have a robust system around it, which would be ways to do this with like some in-store events prior to give out some buys, and also an elo system, like you say. And then, you probably have, I think even from Magic at some events, I remember there being like 10% of like the field having around 1 buy. Like, it wasn't that crazy to see that because of like professional buys based on rating for pro players, and then also just winners of these sort of trial events. So and it seemed to work fine, to be honest. So that is one way to approach it, I think. What does it kind of mean for the game itself and kind of where you are in an event? The one thing I'll say, Brendan, is that I think that having to run into an event round 1 and potentially facing whatever it might be to calling is one of the most interesting things about heading to an open event. And I do agree, like Adam said, as you head down the event, sort of you get through the earlier rounds. We have talked about that before. And with the buys, yeah, sure, that is easier to get through the earlier rounds, right? In theory, if you have 2 first round, round 1, round 2 buy, maybe you're going to dodge the sort of rogue deck because, maybe they don't run as well. They play the bigger decks and they struggle, but maybe they were there to prey on a deck that you're playing, and they get paired up against you in the early rounds and they take advantage of that. And I do think you kind of lose some of that. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this, on whether we need. I think right now we don't need buys in open events. I just don't think there's any reason for it. I definitely don't want to see buys in invitation events because, Nationals, a Worlds, a Pro Tour, any of these invitation events, they're already invitation events. I think that's part of all those players are there. I think the only place I'd like to see buys potentially in the future, and probably only round 1, max round 2, would be open events. But for now, I think we don't need it, personally.
Yeah, I agree with the open events versus invite-only events for sure. I think in the most extreme case, I don't think you could give even some of the highest ranked players in the world on ELO that have grinded, the most and have accrued those points, buys at things like Nationals or potentially like round 1 of a Pro Tour. No. But yeah, it does change. Like, if I... from a competitive standpoint, or from a strategic standpoint, if I could acquire buys in round 1 and 2, I don't know if it would change what deck I would bring, but it just dramatically changes the sort of, the outlook of my tournament. Because for instance, when we played Kano at the Pro Tour, like, it was, we all collectively knew how dangerous it would be to lose round 1. Because we're like, okay, if you end up in the losers meta with Kano, you're probably not coming back, right? There's going to be a lot of Prism out there. There could be a lot of just like random decks. Back then, we were less comfortable into Arcane Barrier, so it's like there could be a lot of Arcane Barrier down there, and all of those things were true. So if I would have been a lot more comfortable walking into that tournament with 2 buys, right? But is what it is, and yeah, it's, I don't know how much if it would have a huge impact, but I would definitely I would want to accrue those buys. Yeah, I think it's just a little out of scope at the moment while we are still kind of small, but as we progress, I think it's something they can explore. I like it as an incentivization program for ELO because that is a real legitimate incentive. Like that is good. It's not a promo, it's not some money, it's not even an invite that goes and gets stacked with like all of your other invites because maybe you have like 2, 3, 4, 5. Which is only a small subset of people, but it'll be more and more later. Like this is a real tangible benefit that you're going to want at these kind of tournaments if you show up, and it's massive quality of life at that. So, yeah, if it was implemented, I think we're congruent, Hayden, on how we think it should work.
Yeah, I just think as well this idea that there's so many other things happening at a just in the game at a competitive level, at a semi-competitive level, even at a stall level. So to try and bring something else right now just doesn't feel right. You know, with Road to National season, with ProQuest seasons, with callings as well. It's tough to then bring in something else. In terms of Adam's other question, would it warp the meta? I don't think it would. Maybe you get this slight thing I just talked about with sort of these rogue decks that maybe don't pair into round 1 or 1 and 2, and that can, but it shouldn't change the meta. It just changes, I guess, the probably the likelihood that a player with those buys pairs into those decks. To be honest, that's all it changes. So, I'd say no, it wouldn't warp the meta, but it would have some impact on what we see potentially, but mostly through the fringe decks potentially doing well. So yeah, great question, Adam. Glad we revisited it. I think we're pretty similar to where we were previously when we talked about this 9 months ago. I think I've come more off of this idea. I was really keen to never put anything on Friday that wasn't just fun and this big event for people to enjoy, like a world premiere or a teams event or something like that. But more and more I come around to the idea that as we go down and the game matures and the calling series matures, that you can use that Friday as potentially something else other than what it is currently. But I do really enjoy the fact that or maybe I will show up on a Friday and play a teams event, or maybe it's not going to work for me and I just get there on the Friday evening, whatever. That flexibility and choice right now is great, which maybe that gets taken away for some players if they feel they have to go for those buys. But yeah, if you want to get your questions in.
I just want to quickly remark on that because I disagree in the sense that like I don't think that that's a reason why there shouldn't be events, right? On that, because it's like you as like the player feel like.
Well, I'm not saying it's a reason,
but you have to
give my personal opinion.
Yeah, but I know I was thinking about it's like I probably still wouldn't go because it's so freaking inconvenient. But yeah, I don't know. I would like those events to be more competitive, especially like the team events. Like then there could actually be a reason for us to show up as a team and compete in these things because there's not a lot of team events. Maybe there will be moving forward, but yeah, it is nice that we don't have to go to that Friday. But if they implemented it, I would not be angry, and I probably still wouldn't play them because they are so inconvenient.
I've gone to every Friday. I mean, for me, it's just the pure being in that environment, being in that atmosphere, and enjoying and playing some more casual Flesh and Blood. Turn my mind off for what's coming this weekend and just play whatever. And I personally really enjoy that. So yeah, I mean, everyone's gonna have different viewpoints, right? Like obviously, me and you have two very different viewpoints on that. Maybe if I start to go to more callings, I would have to ditch the Friday. But it's not. I guess we're in different environments where you have a calling multiple times a year, a couple of hours flight away. Whereas, I might have one max. So I'm going to make the most of that sort of 3 days. So
good problem to have on my end.
Exactly. Very different. So yeah, if you want to get your Command and Cookout questions in, you can do so any which way you like. You can drop a YouTube comment below. Let us know it is a Command and Cookout question. You can, if you're a Patreon, drop it in the Discord channel for Command and Cookout questions. You can tweet at us, DM us, email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Whatever you like to do, you can do it. Anyway, Brendan, should we move into the main topic?
Let's do it. What's your first take, Hayden? I kind of gave mine in the opening sequence here. I think people have picked up on my sentiment, which I'll dive more into. I'll talk more about it. But let's get to Hayden Dale. What's Hayden Dale feeling right now?
Yeah, trying to flip the script on me because this is I wrote these notes and my first question to you was going to be, what is your thoughts about a non-scheduled banning?
I already gave them kind of.
And us, yeah, I know, and us saying goodbye to Stubby Hammerers. So I will chime in with what I think. So I mean, yes, first of all, this main topic is I've very wittily called this episode "Ban Hammerers." And we are talking about the ban, of course, and the impact on Classic Constructed as we head towards all of the remaining Classic Constructed events before August 30th and before the end of the season, before we roll into Nationals. So, of course, just want to recap, we do have multiple Battle Hardens coming. We do have the Calling Singapore, Calling Lille, and, of course, PT Lille. So, yeah, Brendan, my first impressions is, to be honest, I just was, at first I was like, wow, I literally just finished a few games with Sasha, a bit of a small testing session. Jumped off the call. 30 seconds later, saw it like someone had sent me a message about it, and was just like, "Okay, I was not expecting this." I mean, it's an unscheduled ban announcement, right? Why would you ever expect this?
Yeah, and we have a scheduled one that's not that far away. So like I mean, there was a lot of reasons to not expect this. I 100% agree with you. It was very surprising.
So yeah, so surprised. But in terms of the announcement coming, like the timing and it just being dropped like that, in terms of Stubby Hammerers being banned, not surprised really. I think the card clearly enables very powerful combo play, right? Which is, and from very early turns, because you don't require much setup because your setup is on the board with this deck, right? It's your equipment. It's your 3 pieces of equipment.
It's like playing Kano, but you don't have to draw any cards. Just like pop my equipment. It's ridiculous.
I mean, you do. I mean, you do have Ragamuffin's hat and Storm Striders, but it's like also having the blazing, or like the wildfire, or the blazing also on the board.
Yeah,
is what it's like.
So
I would say. So it's a little bit different. I do agree, but so yeah. I mean, in terms of the actual announcement stuff, not that surprised. The announcement coming was surprised about. I guess my thought process after it all kind of settles is I think this is, and we're going to get into this. I think this is probably a good shake-up to the meta before we head into the end of this competitive season in terms of what it does. But what it leaves me with is just kind of this idea of is the ban restricted announcement now purely for, and these scheduled ones I'm talking about, purely for an update to the Living Legend system. And if anything comes up where, there's something that feels too powerful, the meta feels like it's going to shift before a big event, we're just going to get an unscheduled announcement. I will now not be surprised if we just continue to get unscheduled announcements. And I'm not sure I feel happy about that, to be honest. But it's weird because in this instance, I think it really works. I think it's correct. I think what has happened has left me feeling positive overall, even though I feel a little bit negative
about the game or about
the
the studio, right? Like the
everything. To be honest, everything. Like because overall, I do feel a little bit negative about getting just completely out of the blue unscheduled announcement, which again makes things tough. At least last time before the PT, we knew we were going to get this announcement. We knew the date. They said, here is an announcement that's coming on this date. This time we didn't get this announcement, right? So that feels worse. But in some ways, for some reason, I just feel that this made sense. I really can't explain why, but I'm less. Maybe it's because I'm primed now after this. Like I'm just, I wasn't.
Stockholm syndrome. You've just been abused for so long with this. So here's my little tagline is I think that it was a good change to the game, but it was a bad decision. Like, and I could be getting a little jaded, but I feel like that whole ban fiasco with PT1 that sucked, and also the format sucked. I think that we got to play a sort of atypical deck, which was very nice, right? And if we didn't do that, I would not look back on it as fondly. So I think that I have a bit of a bias looking back at PT1 and actually having fun at it. Other than that, like Starvo was still freaking Starvo, and it was still Chain, and then there's like some other decks kind of running around. I'm getting a little jaded with this whole thing, right? Like we have a plan, we have some ban announcements, and then it's just like out of the blue. And it's always like so close to the event. I know, Hayden, you mentioned this on Twitter. You're like, oh, I didn't have a deck. I don't know why you guys are all locked. It's still pretty irritating, right? Like we're still putting in massive amounts of time. We're testing like every day. And it's just like this change. It's one card, but it's a pretty big change, right? Like the meta was definitely warped around fine. And I don't think that was a good thing. And that deck was miserable. Like that deck was one of the more powerful decks I think that has existed in this game. But it might have been able to be hated. The jury was definitely not out on that deck.
Definitely could.
Yeah, on that deck being able to be successful in an open field. But god dang, like dude, with the last minute bans and the last minute just artificial shakeups, like it's getting pretty frustrating as from like a professional perspective. Like I don't think that it's like the studio's behaving professionally and treating us like with integrity like looking at these events. Like it's pretty frustrating. Like there's an argument here that I can't put much merit to because I don't think it's necessarily fair, where it's like, yeah, they probably should have seen this coming. Like it's pretty obvious. They banned Stubby Hammerers and Blitz like already. Like this, they obviously knew about this deck, and yeah, still we ended up in this situation. Nevertheless, I don't know if this ban should have actually occurred. I don't think the jury was out on Fi, although the deck was miserable and was going to hate out a massive amount of decks. And like, I think there was going to be a lot of decks that were going to be unplayable, but it's relatively fine. I mean, that's been a lot of Flesh and Blood. Like Starvo did the same thing, where there was decks that targeted Starvo, and then there was like 70% of heroes which just like literally didn't function against him. I think it would have been pretty similar to Fi, but I don't think that Fi's dominance was actually assured. And yeah, I'm irritated getting this last minute again. And it really like bothers me as I look forward to future professional events, and I consider, testing significantly in advance, developing these sort of longer term macro, testing plan strategies, and maybe, having people fly out, or we going, renting a testing house to get this kind of stuff done. It just makes me pretty unsure about all that stuff. So yeah, I don't know if you feel any of that, Hayden, or if you empathize with that side of it, but that's kind of my takeaway. And like I said, if I can just bring it back to base level, I think that it's a good change, but a bad decision.
Yeah, I just almost forgot that you had a positive at the start there, to be honest. Look, no, I can definitely empathize, and I completely agree with parts of that. And like I said, overall, I feel positive about what we've seen in the past few days, but there is definitely negative impacts, and you listed a lot of them, in terms of time spent, time out from, I guess, how far out we are from an event, any given event. Also, let's bear in mind, people are going to play a Battle Hardened this weekend. People are going to play a Calling the following weekend. Like, these people are just as impacted. Like, it's not just, I guess, the players who are going to be at Pro Tour level. It's so many players who are going to be impacted by this position, even to, card availability and the ability to test. People have schedules, right? People are putting things in place. Even, say you're going to play Battle Hardened up in, I believe it's Portland this weekend, or is it next weekend? There's a Battle Hardened in Portland coming in the next 2 weeks. You're on your way to play that. You've booked in. You've got your fire deck ready to go. You don't have much time to test over the next 2 weeks, so you kind of locked into this deck. That's what you're playing, and all of a sudden this happens, right? And it's like, wow, this is like literally 2 weeks out from me traveling to this event that I've put a lot of effort into and really want to go and do well. And that doesn't feel good, obviously. Going back to the format piece, because I think that's the biggest piece I'm just thinking about when you were talking, that has made me feel positive about this, is I think LSS learned a lot from the Star of the Show banning, and I'll explain. And Star of the Show banning, the ban and restricted announcement that came around Star of the Show at the start of the month prior to the Pro Tour, because that ban and restricted felt panicked. It felt like we know this design of this hero is bad, and we don't want to ban the hero because then you're banning a hero from the game. We want to get it to Living Legend. So instead we remove these cards that in the end didn't do much to the hero. We saw it's still the most played hero at the Pro Tour, same at the Calling. The impact changes the game a little bit in terms of like some decks that were maybe terrible into it and maybe playable, possibly, but not really. It didn't change much. This feels like a real wholesale change to impact, I guess, the feel of the format, the enjoyability of the format, and to open it up to where it potentially should be anyway. I do agree. I think in terms of the Stubby Hammerers thing, I think you said you don't buy into that conversation. That's actually one I do buy into. I think if the studio knew about this already and were banning it in Blitz, and we saw they knew about it already because they published it in the article to say they knew about this, the deck reached maturity of where they thought it could be, and then they've made the ban. Just make the ban announcement beforehand, I think. You avoid all this. This conversation wouldn't be happening, right? We wouldn't even be sat here debating whether it's a net negative or a net positive, because it wouldn't be coming up. It just would have been, hey, this card is too powerful with an interaction coming. We've decided to ban this piece of common equipment. People would move on. You know what I mean? But it's now you get this where you get a lot of start to question the decisions being made with weeks out from events, et cetera, and it starts to feel not so good.
Yeah, it's just like, who's driving here? I've been saying for a freaking while, but it's just like we're getting these compounding, just really oddball decisions that are throwing me off. Like, I thought that they would have learned the lesson from that ban announcement in PT1, because I thought it was a disaster. Like, also thought it felt panicked, but the impact on the meta I don't think was exactly what they were going for there. It was kind of just frustrating overall, and I just thought it was pretty stupid. I'm not gonna lie. So I didn't think they would do it again. Well,
but it's different. That's what I'm saying. That's my point.
Another last minute ban, like, I don't know. I think you're right, where they didn't ban, like, they didn't forego banning Stubby Hammers and went and banned, like, I don't know, like one of the 0 cost head jabs.
Cool Awakening.
Yeah, like they're just like, he has less head jabs now, so it's not as bad. Something stupid like that. Like, yes, I agree with you there. but still, obviously they knew about the freaking card. They banned it in Blitz beforehand, and I don't know. I feel like we're sort of on the same page, but yeah, I maybe disagree with like I feel like I lost more confidence in the studio with this announcement rather than gained.
Yeah, I can see that. I think I guess my net positive that I talked about before is the fact that I feel a lot better about what we're going to see over the next 4 weeks of class constructor play than I did prior to it. Like I actually feel that the Stubby Hammerers Fire combo deck was not enjoyable to play against because the time frame on it was so short. Literally could kill you on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, pretty easily. But I do think it was a bit of a glass cannon. I do think there were ways to hate it out. I think Bravo was a miserable matchup for that deck, and you didn't even have to take your Bravo deck too hard, to be honest. And people said, oh, you can play Sync Belows and you can do this. Okay, cool. If you're playing cards that aren't your combo pieces, Bravo's happy with that.
Yeah.
That's fine. But yeah, I mean, the actual kind of, I guess, the potency of that deck was not enjoyable, I would say. But anyway, that aside, I want to go back to the question that I kind of had and my kind of feeling and see how you feel about this. Do you think we're now in a place where a scheduled ban and restricted announcement means nothing more than to announce Living Legend status?
Yeah. I honestly, I'm trying to like look back in myself and think about the potential emotion that I actually had tied to that event, and I can't see anything. So I actually think that I never trusted the fidelity of that event. Like if that was actually going to be how ban and restriction announcements worked, I don't even look at that date. Like I let you and Sasha tell me if that date is going to be relevant for like upcoming testing, and if the answer is no, I don't even think about it because it doesn't matter, right? Because multiple times throughout the history of this game, it's like outside of Living Legend, they just went and freaking banned it without that announcement. So and maybe I've just gotten too jaded, right? But to answer your question in a short way, no, I don't think that the scheduled ban and restrictions matter. And yes, I do think they will mostly be used for announcing Living Legend status, unless there's enough negative feedback or constructive feedback, that's important, to tell them to, hey, can you please stop doing this right before Pro Tours?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the piece of it. But yeah, it's so hard because I think the flip side, right, is you don't ban. So I have a question for you, but I want to say this first and ask you on this one. So the flip side is you don't ban Stubby Hammerers, right? And you go into this again, not just the Pro Tour, Battle Harden, multiple Battle Hardens, 2 callings, and a Pro Tour with this current format. Is that good? Is that better than the alternative?
So the thing is, like, I think that we're jumping the gun a little bit too much and assuming that the format without that is actually like way better. I would say that, my first thought would be that yes, it is, because the 5 deck was very impressive. But it could not be, right? Like, it could just be more of a Viserai format or more of a Briar format. And you're like, oh, well, Oldhim fits into that. Well, if there's a strategy that sort of someone figures out to beat the slower decks that are trying to play on those Rune Blades, it already kind of smashes Prism and smashes the other aggro decks, then we're back at this sort of a similar kind of format in the end. Maybe it's not a combo deck, but it's still these oppressive linear aggro decks that are, making you have an answer. And I don't know if that's where we are, but we could very well be there. And then, no, it's not really a better format. But like you said, like I really do agree with you. The 5 was kind of a glass cannon. Like, yeah, like you played Bravo into that, you're just like, oh god, I kind of lose here. Or like there was some ice Lexi decks, like the really ice ones, that it was also pretty miserable. I'm sure.
Insidious chill.
Yeah, like, and I never played against Icelander or anything like that, but I'm assuming that was pretty bad. It's just like Icelander maybe couldn't beat anything else. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird spot, and I think that we're putting too much fidelity on like this format is better because we don't know yet. And the fact of the matter is that the Rune Blades are going to come back now. Like the Rune Blades are back on top, back where they belong, where they've always been. So yeah, I think it's very likely to be. I think that they're going like they are on top of the meta. Like those are the decks that you are answering. Right?
We'll get to the meta. I think we'll get to the meta. So the answer to that question, I guess, is right now unsure. Right? Don't know. What would LSS have done had one more person won a road to nationals and Prism reached 1,000 Living Legend status points? What would they have done?
I don't know.
Because if they made this announcement, right, presumably if they decided to do this emergency ban, they would also have to have Living Legend Prism because it's at the points, right? The points threshold. So, conspiracy theory. Put your tinfoil hat on, Brendan. Did LSS pay someone in a finals to punt? No, I'm kidding. That's in all seriousness. That's
I'm happy
Not sure.
Prism is a deck. I know that we have talked a lot, or I've talked a lot of crap about Prism's win rates in the past based off statistics, literally just
Oh,
statistics.
you're about to hear some facts later in
Yeah,
this
but
podcast,
I
my friend.
actually am so happy that that deck exists. Like, I think it's a great deck to check the meta and keep the meta healthy. I think when it rotates out, I'm actually pretty concerned. But Prism's in a great place right now. You have a deck that you have a sort of archetype of decks that you actively just dunk on, and then you kind of just have to solve your matchup against the aggro decks, and you could have a really powerful choice on your hands.
Yeah. So, anyone out there, what do you think? Question to the audience: what would LSS have done had Prism reached 1,000 living legend status points? What would we have done with the Stubby Hammerers? Would we just live? Would they just live the format through? That's the question, right? Because would that have been too big a shakeup? It's a really interesting question, and one that I haven't seen many people ask. But like, I assume that if they had decided to do an emergency ban and restricted announcement, that triggers living legend. That is kind of how it reads to me in the
Can
documentation.
I ask
So.
you a question, Hayden? So you said before in this main topic already, you said they learned from PT1. What is the
Mhm.
chance that they look back at PT1 and was like, that was a freaking genius decision? You know how we went in there and we shook up the meta, and then there was like Kanos that showed up, and there was this kind of diversity in top eight. Like, is there any way that they look back at PT1 and the decisions they made leading up to that regarding the ban restricted list and was like, success? Or do they see it as an
Uh,
abject failure, which I absolutely do see it as, in case you're listening? Abject failure, please don't do it again.
That's funny because I don't see it as a complete failure.
Oh, God, I think it's a
so
failure.
yeah, sure, that's what as you said, but I don't agree. I think it was probably negative overall, right? Like it's not what I wanted to see happen. I wanted to see very different things happen. But in terms of, I think you can't say that it didn't have some success coming out of it. So if you are Alex is looking at that and going, well, look at the top eight that just came into this pro tour, like you can't feel awful about that. You know what I mean? Like there is some positive they can take away from that. I don't think they sat there clapping themselves on the back saying we did an amazing job of the ban at PT1. I think they heard the feedback from the community. They listened to the community a lot. So I think that they're not sitting there saying we did an amazing job, pat each other on the back, pat ourselves on the back. But I think they probably walk away and go, yep, we learned some things that we did incorrectly. Mostly from what I can see with this ban, just around the way that what they implemented with the ban and restricted announcements, so what cards they actually took away. But then I also think that they probably, hopefully, have taken on feedback about the time frame. But this ban announcement say that maybe they haven't. So that's, I don't know. It's hard, right? Without all the information of what them sat there being a fly on the wall, listening to them weighing up all the pros and cons of doing this announcement, right? Like in terms of potentially, for them the negatives were too much to not make this emergency sort of change. So it's tough to say. But yeah, to your question, I don't think they were sat there congratulating themselves, and I also don't think they were saying that it was complete and utter failure. I think they were probably somewhere in between for
Yeah.
PT1.
It's super interesting. I wonder what actually tips them over, right, to come in and do a ban like this. Because like Starvo obviously wasn't enough. There's a difference between banning a piece of common equipment, banning a hero. But like Starvo, which I thought was a worse play experience in Fi, it was probably less subject to being hated, wasn't just banned. And this one kind of just was. So I wonder like what it is quantitatively, if you could actually define it like that, that just kind of tips them over the edge. We're like, we got to ban this because. Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit more, but I do think the deck was actually targetable. Where Starvo was like, I was like, maybe I'll play Prism.
Yeah, like literally that. Yeah, that's. But I also felt the same after the ban.
Yeah,
To me,
yeah,
to be
yeah,
honest.
I agree.
Let me leave you with something, and I want to leave this with all of our Arsenal Pass listeners out there. Is a little bit of a thought about the timeframes, because I've thought pretty hard about this, and I think it's something that makes me feel a little bit less in a bad mind frame this time around with the timeframes. Is that Uprising to Road to Nationals season? So Road to Nationals season is 4 weeks, right?
Mhm.
I mean 5 weeks this time, but there's literally 2 weeks between release and Road to Nationals starting, and then you have this Road to Nationals season. I think in LSS's eyes, and I think they probably need to communicate this a lot clearly so that I guess us as a community as players feel this. That is the season. I think making this ban and restricted announcement after the season's finished, that to them is the season finishing, and then you still have 3 weeks before the Pro Tour and calling a little 2.5, 3 weeks before. So what, 3.5 weeks and 2.5, 3 weeks before Singapore. I think to them that is the logical step to take in terms of a break in the season of when to make this announcement. And I just want people to just sort of think about that and see how they feel about it, because I do honestly think, actually thinking more about it, that is LSS's approach. They've gone, okay, Road to Nationals is over. That's the end of the Road to Nationals season. If we're going to make any changes based on these results, we're going to reflect on all the data and what's set here and how the community is reacting to this, and what we feel based on power level is we're going to make the change right now. This is the logical time to do it between this and the next season. So I think do away with sets as a season. It's events as a season. So Road to National season is over. Now we're going to head into the Pro Tour Lille season, the callings and the Pro Tour Lille season. And I think that's what it is, honestly. That's what I think they're thinking.
Could be 2 points, and they kind of contrast each other. One is that it could be too myopic to sort of judge this ban from the view of only looking at the Pro Tour, which is what someone like me is kind of doing, right?
I massively agree.
A lot of players that don't play in the Pro Tour, and that's it could not be their main concern. If it is, like you said, if it is based off seasons and things like that, I know for me as a player, like I think that sucks, but that's because I'm trying to prepare for Pro Tours. I'm trying to win them. If I wasn't, it wouldn't really bother me. So, I mean, there's like kind of 2 points there. Where, like, obviously the one is more from the player that's going to the PT, but at the same time, you could just be wrong because you're focusing so much on your own individual event, which doesn't affect the larger player base of Flesh and Blood, which I'm sure that this deck was just absolutely dunking on casual events, which is honestly probably why they were quicker to ban it.
Yeah, play experience. And I think they've got to really nurture the in-store play experience. So yeah. Anyway, something to think about. Food for thought. Let us know your thoughts in the comments on how you feel about, I guess, does what I say make sense? Does it make no sense? How do you actually feel about the ban restricted announcement as well, and the time frames and the changes made? Because I feel like I'm seeing less discourse this time. Anyway, Brendan, let's get in and talk about the Classic Constructor meta. So I want to ask you a question first, which is, what do you think the overall impact of the Stubbies ban is? I think you've kind of already said that with Rune Blades. I think you said that, but what about how do you think the meta reacts initially? So we've got Battle Hardened Portland. I just checked the dates in 2 weeks' time. So what do you think the kind of initial reaction to the meta is?
Well, we should just break down like what this ban actually means, or what we think it means. And what I think this is like Fi. I think the Fi is no longer like a combo deck. I think it's just an aggro deck. Is it still very strong? Yes, I think it is still very strong. Is it the number one aggro deck? I don't think so, but time will tell. So I think it's competing with the Rune Blades for that spot for the linear aggressive deck of the format. So that's the big change. So at the same time, I think there's going to be some decks that suffer from that. Potentially Bravo, right? Bravo was sort of becoming potentially a breakout because of how much it preyed on this deck, and it does have game into some of the Rune Blades as well. Prism was getting more hated out. Prism was a miserable matchup in Defy, so I think the Prism comes back, maybe Bravo goes out, Oldhim stays in his weird niche where he tries to beat the Rune Blades, but then kind of has this really bad matchup into Prism, and we kind of go back to that meta I felt like we had in Road to Nationals a little bit.
Yeah, potentially. I think that's interesting, and good segue into, let's talk a bit about the final 2 weeks of Road to Nationals. So we had Michael Hamilton join us 2 weeks ago to talk about weeks 1 to 2 of Road to Nationals and the data that we had off the back of that, and kind of how the meta was shaping up and what was happening with Uprising, being fairly new at that point, now a bit more mature. We've had 2 more weeks of Road to Nationals, as well as, of course, these Battle Hardens calling Utrecht. And so a bit more to go off. Of course, the kind of story of Utrecht was this Fire deck, right? Was the breakout of that. But there's more around that as well. There's also these 2 weeks of Road to Nationals where we actually saw a shift in the metagame, not just with Fire. So I do just kind of want to start, Brendan, and talk a bit about that. So in the first 2 weeks, we talked about how, the most played decks were Briar, then Fire, then Prism, then Viscerai, and then Lexi. Those were kind of like the top 5 most played decks. In terms of like the win percentage, Viscerai was topping the charts. Then Briar and Prism. Fire was actually quite low at 4th, only like a 10% win rate, and then Lexi sort of below that. So then you look at the shift between what happens in week 1 and 2 and weeks 3 and 4, and there is a pretty sizable shift. So Fire does become the most popular hero in the last weeks of Road to Nationals. I think not surprising, right? Utrecht's in there, a lot of discussion about how Fire's doing, and of course Stubby Hammerers, these builds rising to the top. And a lot of, something like Briar really takes a drop off on most played deck. I think it becomes the 4th most played deck, sort of similarly in line with Lexi, but Viscerai and Prism are much more played. And even Dromai ends up being more played than than Briar, which is really interesting. Wow. As we head to as we head into the last 2 weeks of the Road to Nationals meta. In terms of like what that meant for, I guess, what did well. I mean, when you look at what made the top 8, a fairly similar representation to play to what made top 8. So Prism had a slight uptick, but Fire was still the most dominant deck. It was like nearly 20% of decks in top 8. And then Prism was about 11% of decks in top 8, up from about 9% of those played. So a little bit of a shift. Dromai actually converted pretty well into top 8s, and Briar had a slight uptick in top 8s as well as Viserai. And you saw things like Lexi and unfortunately some of the Guardians drop a little bit. Brendan, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I want to lead into in terms of what this metagame might look like. Looking at the winners metagame. So Fire took a bit of a drop off in the winners metagame when you look at the last 2 weeks of Road to Nationals. Went from about 17% of the sort of share of play in top 8 to about 14% of the deck's winning events. Now, that was good enough for equal second with Viserai. Viserai had an uptick from about that sort of, ticked up and played to top 8 conversion to win conversion. So it has pretty sizable, nice conversion rate, up to 14% as well. But over 1/5 of the winning decks in weeks 3 to 4 were Prism. Prism had a 21% win share from a 9% sort of rate of showing up at events. So a really big slice of the pie of wins in weeks 3 to 4, with Briar also sort of sneaking in there at 4th. What's your thoughts on this kind of shift? Like a really big shift to where Prism was in weeks 1 and 2, and also Viserai about the same, Fi about the same, Briar about the same, but this massive uptick in Prism.
Listen, I'll acknowledge the data, but the answer is I have no idea. Like I have no idea how Prism is making that kind of jump in terms of conversion rates, especially to actually be winning these events. And at the height of Fi. So I have no idea, but I think that, if I was going to impart any value on the listeners, it's that Prism's stock from this ban has only gone up. So if it was doing well before, I think that, if it's a deck you're thinking about, I think it's a legit pick for the Pro Tour.
Powerful. Prism's really powerful. I mean, I kind of done with numbers here, and I just want to talk about the meta with you a little bit. But before I wrap up my numbers segment, I do just want to talk about in the final 2 weeks of Road to Nationals, what the actual win conversion was for these heroes. Because I did say, I gave you the sort of stats of what the breakdown was of win shares, but the win conversion. So of the Prisms showing up, 21% of them are winning.
That's
sorry, no, sorry, no, I got that wrong. 12% of them are winning. 12% of them winning, 30% of them converting to top 8s. 46% of them converting to top 8s. 12% of them are winning. So that's a really big win conversion rate. It's the highest. I mean, what's next highest? Briar's around 7%, Ultim's around 7%, Viserai's 6%. I mean, Fi was sitting at around, what's that, 4.5%. So, this win share, and granted, there's local metas, and I think the sample size of these events in the last 2 weeks, there's a reasonable amount of events, but in terms of like sample size to really back the starter, it's not where it needs to be. You'd need a lot more events than this. That's just statistically true. But I do think it's a really interesting representation and shows how this meta's kind of shifted. And I kind of agree with you. I don't necessarily know what it is other than Prism is powerful. We saw a lot of uptick of decks like Dromai. We did see slight upticks in both the Guardians showing up, in theory to sort of combat Fi and Runeblades potentially. And we did see a drop off of a deck like Briar, right? Which is traditionally probably the worst matchup for you, or has been the worst matchup for you. Granted Fi there now. But a deck like Viserai, in my experience, is not that bad a matchup for Prism. And with that growing in share as well, it just feels like, actually, if you dig into the data a little bit, it does make sense that Prism did improve to this extent. That is a little bit surprising, but I think it just shows the raw power of what this deck can do. It's really hard for almost any deck. Turn 1 or turn 0 double aura. It's tough. It's a tough proposition to start the game with.
For sure. I mean, regarding Prism, that's really all I have to say about it. It defies odds. It's been consistently successful, which is probably why it's getting close to being living legend. So it's a solid pick. As Briar comes back into the format, potentially, maybe it'll be a bit harder. But I have seen Prism thrive in Briar in just, I don't know, Briar infestations, like back when I was at the Ohio tournament. So the deck defies odds. Unfortunately, the other deck that I like to impart nice words on, Boltyn, does not defy odds, and that is a bad pick for the Pro Tour. Boltyn is a terrible hero.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Brendan is playing Bolton at the Pro Tour.
People
So
would be so
what
pissed. Could you imagine?
they would be, you would. I think you'd be cancelled, to be honest. And I'm not sure why. I'd probably just be bringing dishonor on the name of Bolton, to be
Yeah.
honest, if you played it. What is the impact of Prism then? So let's extrapolate to the next 4 weeks. What starts to happen? Because we talked about, you talked about Runeblades are back, Weda's Guardians, but what, like, based on these pure numbers of what we're seeing, Prism is clearly a lot more popular, and it should be because it's doing well, right? So it's going to see more of an uptick. What is the actual impact of Prism on this? Does Prism now define this meta and not Fire?
Oh, I don't think I feel like Prism never defines a meta, to be honest.
You say that.
Nah, but I think it's been successful, right? But I don't think it ever defined the meta. It was always like beating up on something and then kind of had like a bad matchup into the other deck, right? So I don't think it defines the meta, but I do think it forces some of these Guardians out. Like Bravo's kind of a worse pick, even though I think that Bravo's like better into Prism than Oldhim is. And if people are gonna be trying to sleeve up Oldhim to deal with these Runeblades, I think the data shows that more people will play Prism, that it's a good pick. So maybe we see a downtick in just Guardian overall. And I think that's a very reasonable thing to extrapolate from this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we saw it already, to be honest. You saw it in just the conversion rates to top eights and the win shares that Guardians dropped off, even though they were there obviously to prey on Fire. Maybe the matchup into something like a Viscerai, maybe not as good as some thought. Maybe people have plans. Prism doing so well is a big part of that. I do just want to, you said that you don't think it has defined a meta. Maybe. I think it has regulated a lot of metas at the very minimum.
I'd agree with you on that one.
The start of this uprising meta. I mean, this meta I think is going to be, if it's not going to be defined by Prism, which I think it could be, I think it's at least going to be regulated by Prism. And I know Prism is like this hero that's like really polarizing. People like love it, and then people have like this massive gripe of like, just Living Legend Prism. I'm sick of it. It's it's a pain. And I can see that as like, especially if you're a Guardian player, right? Like just a friggin' nightmare. So.
I love
the
it.
impact of Prism, I think, is going to. What's that?
I just want to say I love it. I love it. I love what Prism does because I freaking hate Guardian, and I hate people who have any margin of success with fatigue, which is not all Guardian players. We had the great Michael Hamilton on here. Man is a genius, but if you literally block with all your cards and that is your game plan, you deserve to get double ward out of the game.
Okay. I don't know if I'll go quite that far, but yeah.
It's okay.
Prism
I will.
impact. I think it's. Yeah, I know you will. I think the impact for all of the remaining 4 weeks of events before we get to that next August 30th ban and restrict announcement, which is probably, at this point, you'd say it's probably likely that we're going to see Prism hit the Living Legend at that point. I mean, it's not like in the Road to National season, you would say, yes, it's very likely, right? I think people thought it was going to be likely coming out of Road to National season. Now it needs to win one of these Battle Hardens, a Calling, or the PT. And I think in total that's 6 events because there's a Battle Hardened at, I need to check what events it is. I think there's about 6 events that this could win. So it's not guaranteed, but I think based on the power and what we're seeing in Prism, it's probably likely that it wins one of those now.
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
I think so. But if I say I think so, then it's not going to happen.
Well, you are the spokesperson for all of the Light Illusionist players out there, as is well known. You famously hard claimed into it week 0 of the format, and then you just started to absolutely dunk on the Prism fraternity, and then you came around. They won you over. You took Prism to Indianapolis, and you were seen on camera playing it. You had that infamous look at the camera, and you're winning in round with Prism, and she did you a little bit dirty apparently, but now you are seen as, I think, one of the Light Illusionist family, Brendan. So
I just didn't like playing the deck when it was so powerful. I like to play the underdog deck. I can't play the meta deck, So obviously, when Prism
you played it when it was most powerful.
I mean, some people thought that that was a real good counter to Chain, and maybe they were right. They won the tournament, so who am I to say that deck sucked in Chain?
Anyway, we're getting off track here. What about Fi? What replaces Fi, or is Fi just Fi? What is now so it's weird because it was, I would say, the premier aggro deck, but it was also the most explosive combo deck. Like, it was a combo deck. It was an aggro deck and a combo deck. Now, so what replaces what Fi was doing in the meta? Yeah,
so I don't think that Fi replaces Fi. I think that it's still like a relevant aggro deck. I just think like it was also a combo deck, but it was just like way better than the other aggro decks. And I think it was the pick. That being said, now that it has had this reduction in its power level, I think that the Rune Blades will actually compete with Fi for that spot and maybe win out, right? So we will see like Fi significantly downtick, and because I really think that in most metas, unless like I guess if there's so much Prism in a meta because of the banning on Scalata, like Viserai and Briar into Prism is like definitely not equal. You definitely want to be playing Briar, and like Viserai's okay, since the banning. So that way, I think there could potentially be like two legitimate aggro decks in a format, but like I think Viserai or Briar potentially win out for that spot, and then Fi kind of fades into like this 1.5-ish area, but it's still represented because it's still powerful. And those combo turns even without Stubby are still ridiculous, right? If you are playing Pouncing Links, and Mask of Momentum is a good card, so I think that I think it falls down to like tier 1.5.
Yeah,
still very, very good, but just not the best.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's had a pretty significant nerf. I think some of this idea of what the share of the Fi meta starts to be taken up by other aggro decks. I'll agree. I think it starts to be taken up by Prism. To be honest, I think Prism starts to eat into what was some of Fi's share of the pie because it just becomes more appetizing to play this deck that, its worst matchup just got hit a little bit, or one of its worst matchups got hit. I do think Fi is still a contender for one of the best aggro decks in the format. I actually think that like there's a lot of decks so far in my testing, a lot of decks that aggressive decks that could be viable. They're all really similar in power level. I think they just do slightly different things and attack the meta in slightly different ways and have different benefits and different reasons to play them, depending on what you expect the meta to be and maybe how you tweak and tune them. I actually think we could see up to like 4 aggro decks pretty reasonably represented at the next few weeks of events. I wouldn't be surprised. I think between the Rune Blades, between Fi, I still think Fi, Mask of Momentum and Shuko, these ongoing effects are still really, really powerful. And now you have this kind of like almost like semi-fridge that you can use with Ninja. Like I do think it is good. And then plus, maybe it's something like a Dash Aggro or Dorinthia. I think those two, we could see some representation of. There's fringe heroes that do aggressive things. I think we're going to start to see come back in because the deck that was just outright faster than them did, no matter how they wanted to compete, they wanted to compete on a slightly different aggressive axis, but they just couldn't be fast enough for it to matter. Whereas I think now that changes a bit. So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, the only thing that I can comment on there is Prism. So yeah, like one of your worst matchups comes out of the format in Fi, but it also is being replaced by your worst matchup, which is Briar. So if Briar does come for that spot, I think it's worse for Prism potentially.
Yeah, if right. So
if
I say half the fires disappear because they can no longer play Stubby Hammerers, and those turn into Briar. Yeah, sure. I mean that's not great for Prism, right? But if say only a quarter of that turns into Briar, that's quite a big difference. Like especially if people are saying, well, Guardian maybe does Ultim take like an uptick? Who knows? Where does things sit? Where does Prism sit? There's a big shift there. I think it's hard to know what people might go to. I would just struggle to say that everyone would just straight move to Briar, for instance. So it's some people might move to Viserai, some people might move to Dorinthia, to Prism, to Guardian. It's hard to say. People will stay with Fi because Fi is still viable and still strong and still has these impactful cards and ability to still do a combo turn while still just presenting damage and things like mask effects or doing pouncing links turns. So what about Viserai? Is he just Mr. Consistent? He just seems to be, since the Scalata ban or even before, he just seems to just be around, just doing his work, just getting about it. You look at the results from all 4 weeks of Road to Nationals, slightly higher conversion rate than representation rate, and just putting work in by the looks of it.
Yeah, it's just a good deck, especially if you cut out those freaking generics and belittle minnowism. You got a solid aggressive deck on your hand.
Apparently.
I think Viserai is a great deck. Is it the deck? I don't know. It's tough to say. But like, if we talk about pillars of the formats and things that I'm testing against, like my litmus test for an aggressive deck is definitely against Viserai. If my aggressive deck can't outrace Viserai, what the heck am I doing? Like, I don't think it's a deck that I want to be playing. So I think it's a good deck, and I think that it's gonna show up in force over the next couple weeks at events.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be there in whatever way, shape, or form people choose to play it. I think it's going to be there. I think it'll see a rise. I don't think it's going to see a rise. I think people are going to move to maybe things more like Briar or Prism, to be honest. But I think Viscera at this point feels like such a known quantity. Like people know what to expect. They know what's going to show up. It feels kind of the same with Briar. But if you're expecting an uptick in Prism, which deck would you rather be on? I think that's what people have to decide. So, and I mean, I think people want to be on Briar, but you have to decide if that's the right decision based on what the Guardians might do. So it's hard to know. What about the rise in Briar? Like I do think, if you look at the Road to Nationals data, Briar actually went the opposite way. So it started higher, it took a dip, but that's, I think, due to the rise of Fire. Do we now see hit the bottom and then come back up with this meta?
I think this is the biggest winner out of like most decks, right? Like I think that Briar's stock went up to an extent, right? Like I think Briar was suffering potentially like kind of the most, aside from the irrelevant heroes that are less competitive at this point. Like Briar, I feel like the floodgates have really opened for her. Like there was this deck that was kind of keeping her down. She's very powerful in the Prism, is also relatively powerful into Guardian because of things like Channel Mount Heroic. Yeah, I think that Briar stock went up, and that should, if you are a disenfranchised 5 player and your deck has now been quote unquote banned, like Briar is something pretty legit pick to look at.
I want to talk about our expectations for the PT and just kind of what we're looking, I guess, like broad spectrum, kind of what we think a meta could be. But I think the best way to actually do that to start with is I want to talk about winners and losers, Brendan. So I wanted to maybe each of us just give our kind of winners and losers from this change to the format. And I'll start, give you a little bit of time to think. But I think the clear winners for me, because you just said about it, at Prism, Briar, I think are the 2 biggest winners in this change. I think, there's some fringe decks that definitely get some wins, potentially something like maybe Dash gets a bit of a bump out of that. I think there's some decks that stay probably around where they are. I think Bravo is still a good option, still a good deck. We're going to see it, even though, maybe its biggest deck to prey on has taken a hit and is going to lose share. I still think Bravo is strong. I think Viscera stays around the same. I don't think it's necessarily lost or gained too much from this. It might net out because, you lose some Fire, but then Prism goes up. I think losers, though, on the flip side of that, like you talked about, I think Oldhim is, to me, seems like it's a loser so far, and Lexi feel like the 2 decks that maybe lose out of this because Lexi in particular, I think Ice Lexi builds are looking more and more attractive with a more narrow metagame. Lexi is the more open a metagame is, I think the harder and harder it is to play Lexi. It's just hard to tech the deck to the way you want it.
Yeah, well, I could repeat that, but I pretty much agree with you 100%, except for potentially Prism. Like, yeah, so maybe if like tons of Briar come back in, then Prism could like weirdly inadvertently lose from this ban. So one thing that the one fringe deck is Kano. So Kano actually benefited from this. Kano could not do anything against Vi. Way too fast. Like there's 2 ways of attacking Kano. One is your stupid Oasis Respite. Sorry, I have a little bit of animosity for that card. And your Arcane Barrier, or it's just being like so ridiculously fast that like it doesn't even matter what Kano throws at you. He's dead because he's on 30 life. Kano's big. Kano definitely won from this. Big win. Big dub for Kano. Can it be competitive? Yeah, definitely. I don't think it could be Fi. Like, I don't think it could be Fi. And if it did, it would be a total crapshoot.
If the story is that, and this is just the narrative I have in my head, but I really expect Prism to benefit a lot from this, and I think that's what the data's showing us. Prism had 1/5 of the Road to Nationals wins in week 3 and 4. I expect to see Prism uptick.
Yeah,
to a reasonable degree. That's not good for Kano.
Let me take you to chapter 2 of my story here. Kano sucks. So Kano's very meta dependent, and this meta being like Guardian decks that just naturally pack away Spite and then a ton of Prisms and Briars who are playing Spell Void. I don't think it's the pick. I want it to be the pick so bad. Just give me a little bit of hope and I'll play Kano. I'll show up with the Wizard, but I think that this is one of the worst formats possible for Wizard at this point.
Brendan, be careful. People are going to say, Brendan, he was trying to talk down Kano just so he could bring it to the PT, trying to get people to drop their AB, their Spell Void, and their Oasis Respites.
They can't. I talk so much. I say so many bad things about so many loved heroes like Bolton. That everybody gets some. Kano, Bolton, Prism every now and then. So nothing's off limits. And yeah, I do actually think that Kano's in a rough spot.
Yeah, do you want to sort of throw any shade or say anything bad about other heroes that we maybe haven't done so before? I feel like you haven't said much bad against Viscerai before, maybe Bravo. Ultim I know you dislike, but you haven't said you know it's not for it's because you don't like the play styles. Is there anything else you want to kind of just talk down on while we're here as well?
Yeah, just shout out to Mansant. Levius sucks. Somehow he makes it happen. But yeah, Levius pretty. I mean, I wish the Brutes would have their time in the sun. To be honest, I know that this was a bit of a
telling me
bit of a rhetorical question, but I do wish the Brutes were not so bad. Like you're like, oh, they could be good into Prism. I think that Brute is like. It has a good matchup into Prism. Don't get me wrong, but you would think it would be better. You would think it would be a lot better. Yeah. So that's a big bummer, and I think Dorinthia loses stock. If you were playing Dorinthia before, for whatever reason, because I heard there's some mumblings about Dorinthia, freaking fat boomers out there. Yeah, I think the stock goes down on that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we're definitely digressing into some dark territory here. So for that, I apologize. Look, I think it's going to be interesting the next 4 weeks. Regardless, like let's put we're onwards and upwards, Brandon. We're putting the banned and restricted announcement behind us, the unscheduled announcement. We've set our piece about it. I think we're similar on some things. We disagree on the outcome, but we both agree that there's learnings to be taken from this. I think. Now looking forward, I'm just interested to see what happens. Battlehard in Portland, Singapore calling, and then Lille, of course. It's going to be really, really interesting. I think we've kind of talked a lot about the meta, the decks we expect to see rise and fall, and I guess now it's just really for time to tell. I do think we're going to see a pretty diverse field. I think there's basically no chance we see the top 3 decks have the same representation as they did at PT1, at PT2, or even, to be honest, Singapore.
Maybe disagree, because we have these big events before. I think these big events are going to narrow the meta a lot. I think it's going to look really diverse.
1 week between Singapore though, and it's a mixed format.
Dude, you say that, right? You say that, but I remember when we went to U.S. Nationals, like I expected a lot of Briar, but people freaking hopped on that deck like just fire so fast. And this was after the weekend of the UK Nationals, and we saw that breakout performance. I would not underestimate the participants of the Pro Tour's ability to switch decks quickly if something does break out. Is the best deck, but it has to be pretty compelling because it's got to take them off their freaking prisms and whatever other freaky decks they're playing. So it could be, but I do think that these big events are going to narrow the meta a lot. But if you are playing any of the callings leading up to this, they're going to be very exciting.
Oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait to be in Singapore and playing. I think no clue what I'm going to play at the stage, but it's going to be awesome regardless.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week, about sandbagging a deck during Singapore and like how that all works. At the end of the day, if you're going to Singapore, I think it's a huge advantage that you get to play that format effectively before the tournament. But Hayden, we'll talk about your deck and about the strategy around that kind of tournament.
Okay, you have to let me know what I'm playing first.
Yeah. Okay, no.
All right. That wraps up the main topic of the pod. Brendan, Google review this week.
Yep. So we got a Google review. This is from man, I really get scared with some of these names. Like, I don't know. There's some trick in here. Well, we'll just call him QH because it's a scary one. And the title is Meta Aid, 5-star review. It says, this podcast is great for any intermediate players and experts alike. I started to play Flesh and Blood only to realize there wasn't anyone nearby to play with until recently. And this podcast has kept me up to date on the current format, metas, and trends, even in the downtime. Thanks, guys! ! That was all one sentence, by the way. It was a masterful use of commas. But thank you so much for that 5-star review. It does mean the world to us. But Hayden, if someone's listening right now and they want to get their message read out on the Arsenal Pass podcast, how do they do it? How do you submit a review? Is it hard? Do I have to know all these details about these random podcast platforms? Or is there maybe an easy way to do it?
Really difficult. You actually have to go to your local government official and you have to lodge a form. It's called a 95654 form. No, it's really easy. All you have to do is go to ratethispodcast.com/Arsenal Pass. It'll tell you to click on your preferred platform, and then you just leave us a review. We really appreciate it. It helps us get on those charts, get out to more people who might be looking for Flesh and Blood content, but aren't aware of us and can find the pod. So, or maybe they're looking for just TCG content, and then maybe they'll get into Flesh and Blood. So it does help. And of course, we do love the the ones that give us a chuckle and give us the cheeky 5 stars. But you don't have to if you don't feel like we're worth it. I was just Googling as well to see about that name. I think it's fine. But anyway, thanks QH for your review. Brendan, that's going to do it for this week's pod. If you do want to jump on Twitter as well, we are engaging in Fab Twitter as per usual. You can find us at Brendan APG and Fian_Dale. Of course, that's Brendan and me respectively. YouTube, we are uploading videos to YouTube. We've got a couple of gameplays that went up in the last few weeks. Also, Brendan has done some deck techs with some notable community members, as well as I did a Viserai one, I think about a month ago now. But those are also all up on our Patreon if you want the sideboard guides and deck guides as well for the Lexi, the Phi, and the Viserai decks. Make sure I say the heroes in there, Brendan. And massive shout out to all of our patrons. Thank you very much. Until next week, see you then.
Thanks, everyone.